We advise a bias for action so long as every action generates an after-action review.
This is the Economics for Business podcast. We are here to help all businesses become champions for customers and value, improving lives with preferred and innovative products and services. We offer you the knowledge and tools to make your entrepreneurial journey a successful one. Now, here's your host, Hunter Hastings.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. In our ongoing drive to put better tools in your business management toolkit, we're bringing you a new one today. On our Economics for Business website, you'll find over 100 different tools tailored to every stage of the entrepreneurial journey, from imagining new value propositions to managing and organizing your growing firm and building a global brand. Our tools include templates, blueprints, process maps, checklists, methods, analytics, and more. They distill practical excellence from multiple sources, from the latest academic economics research to the business experience of successful entrepreneurs. Generally, they support the adaptive entrepreneurial method, which is the business management approach for today, for firms of every size, for the world of complexity and continuous change. Entrepreneurial because entrepreneurship is the engine of innovation for the delivery of new and higher levels of well-being and satisfaction to customers, whether in the B2B or B2C channels. And adaptive because we embrace change. It's a standard characteristic of the environment, what Ludwig von Mises called continuing, ceaseless, and perpetual flux. It's the business condition. We can't avoid change, and we can't afford to change more slowly than the world is changing around us. How do businesses pull this off? In two ways. First, we replace the no longer helpful tools of strategy and planning. These are attempts to freeze change and to predict and control the future. These attempts are no longer feasible. Second, we substitute entrepreneurial judgment, which can be broken down into entrepreneurial orientation, the ability to filter external data subjectively with a strong, clear, and confident internal mindset. Entrepreneurial intent, the capacity to set and communicate clear goals while retaining adaptive agility. Decision-making with the understanding that decisions are just hypotheses about what might happen. And action, the most important component of entrepreneurship. Don't plan, don't strategize, act within the guidelines of your intent. If that sounds risky, we've got the tool for you. It's the AfterAction review. Let's listen to an expert, Mark McGrath. Mark is a multiply licensed, multi-credentialed, and highly experienced executive in the very dynamic field of financial asset management. He's a trend-following trader. He's a Marine Corps graduate with a master's degree in economics and an especially deep knowledge of Austrian economics, and one of the leading experts on the OODA loop model, which we discussed in episode number 138. In full disclosure, Mark and I are co-authors of an Austrian economics research conference paper on the adaptive entrepreneurial method we're talking about today. Mark, welcome again to the Economics for Business podcast.
Thanks for having me, Hunter. It's good to be back.
Well, it's exciting because last time you were here, you described what we're calling the adaptive entrepreneurial model, which is a new way of thinking about how to run a business in a world you and others call VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, always changing, always dynamic. There's no time for slow motion tools like strategy and planning. And so the method is action-based. So entrepreneurial businesses of all sizes, we're not focusing on any size, but on entrepreneurship, you act in an experimental fashion, apparently, and use learning from experimental outcomes to decide what to do more of and what to do less of. So maybe you can start us off with the basic background of the adaptive entrepreneurial method, Mark.
Sure. Well, since the last time we spoke on the podcast was last October, you and I have accomplished quite a bit, finishing our paper on entrepreneurship on this very topic, bridging the gap in Austrian economics theory, which I guess we could link to. And as you know, from the paper that we wrote, that was a big part of it. The more that we can keep our orientation matched, our internal operating system, both as individuals, as teams, organizations, as a culture, the more that we could keep that matched to reality, and the more that we could learn fast enough, the more that we could augment that as time continues, we should be able to identify what changes that we need to make faster than competitors, than the rate of change, than market forces. So really, OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act, is, in my words, it's an axiomatic framework for learning. It's how we improve our capacity for independent action, as we said in the paper, quoting John Boyd himself. John Boyd, who was the discoverer, I say the discoverer, not the inventor of these theories, and was the teacher of these things. So the idea is that in order to adapt amid, as you say, a market or world, then universe that's always in a state of flux, that's always in a state of change, that's always in a state of becoming, it's on us to continue to match our orientation to those realities as they continue to unfold, in order to make the necessary adjustments that we need to make to achieve our own goals, our own personal goals, our own organizational goals, our own, as our friends the Cabreras would say, to manifest the vision and the mission to achieve that vision, to improve that capacity for learning in order to accomplish the mission within the overall vision. So that's really what I've been posting a lot about lately on LinkedIn, is about that concept of learning, and how do we become better learners ourselves? How do we promote and build a culture of learning? And how do we become aware of the characteristics of an effective learning organization, effective learning institution, which, having now finished that paper that we did, and finally I've been to the Mises Institute in person, it confirmed what I've been a member since 2005, but finally seeing it with my own eyes in March of 2022, it confirmed for me that it's an exceptional learning organization, that is a exceptional learning culture that's filled with exceptional learners that are always learning and trying to get better. And I think that's where, as we said in the very beginning of all this, that's where I see a lot of the synergy between, the Austrian way of thinking and the John Boyd or the Marine Corps way of thinking. It's very similar.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the keys is action. That's the A in OODA, but we can start there because that's the Austrian theory of entrepreneurship. It's what Peter Klein calls action theoretic. It's about action. But the point about action is not to be right, not to be perfect, not to have Newtonian predictability, but to generate new data, new interactions with the environment, new feedback. So let's start there, the A in OODA, acting.
Yes. So when we act, if you recall from the OODA diagram, what we're doing there is we're testing a previously generated hypothesis that emerged from observations that we processed through our orientation. And when we act and we observe the effects of those actions, it feeds back to us in a learning loop. And in that learning loop, we augment our orientation. We reframe it. We see what changed. Is there anything that we need to understand? Or is there anything that we need to know more about what we thought was going to happen? What was the end result of that? What did we learn? It's effective or it's not effective. What adaptations do we need to make? So as we continue to act, we continue to generate, we could say, new data. We're generating new information that we're in turn going to reprocess, and we're going to make sense of that within our orientation to stay aligned to whatever it is that we're trying to do. If we're trying to run our business, if we're trying to achieve a sales goal, if we're trying to compete in a sports team, right? We're constantly learning and making the necessary changes that we need to do to align with that end goal, which also resides inside of our orientation. So as we act and we see what happens, we're evaluating that relative to our destination, relative to where we ultimately want to wind up, and how we're going to measure whether we're successful or not.
So you're going to introduce us today, and we're going to discuss a tool that people can use in this action-oriented way of running a business. It's not a recipe; it's a tool, and you call it the after-action review.
Mm.
So let's just introduce that as a concept first, and then we'll start to break it down into its component parts.
Sure. There's a paper that we're going to cite that we'll link to that said that the term after action review goes back to I think the U.S. Army using it back in the early 80s, was how to make improvements as circumstances will unfold. How do we deal with uncertainty? How do we continue to get better in unpredictable situations? Well, the answer is really learning. And an after action review is probably the simplest way for any individual or any team to start to improve their learning by positing the questions, what's supposed to happen? What do we want to have happen? What actually happened? What could we do? What worked? What didn't work? What could we do differently next time? What should we avoid doing next time? And it's a constant questioning. It's a constant solicitation of feedback from everyone involved to gain as many perspectives as possible to make the necessary refinements for the whole team to benefit or for the whole company to benefit. It's really easy. And like I say, as you say, it's a tool. Anything that would be formulaic or sort of recipe, of course, I would not really have any prescriptive measures as a one size fits all. You can do it very specifically when you're interacting with a specific team or organization. You can help them create a structure that fits for them. But generally speaking, it's going to address those questions. What did we do well? What could we be doing better? What could we be doing differently? What are the things that we're going to do next time in order to get better results? That's the overall picture.
Yeah, and a big part of it too, it seems to me, Mark, is not fearing action, because sometimes we freeze because we're scared of being wrong and we don't know what to do. With an after action review, that's not the point. We're going to generate some new data and we'll learn from that and we'll get better. So it's a very positive kind of a tool, I think.
Yes, if done correctly, if done effectively, and then we can talk more about that, because the cultural tone, the climate tone has to be set just right by leadership, and it has to be widespread across the group, such that we're getting accurate, effective feedback from everyone involved, that we're uncovering blind spots, that we're not missing anything, and also too that we're not making assumptions, because I think a lot of times in a culture that doesn't have a very healthy after action review system, a lot of knowledge is retained on the top, and a lot of what needs to be done is retained on the top, and what happened is retained on the top. And what that creates is what I would call, it's a single point of failure, where knowledge is being amassed in one area, and everybody on the group is afraid to say anything or afraid to challenge anything, because nobody wants to get fired, or nobody wants to be made fun of, or nobody wants any type of retaliation. So people don't speak up. And again, we'll probably get into some of the cultural aspects of how to really do this in a healthy, effective way. The Marine Corps, yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. Let me push off the culture for a second while we break down the tool for people. So one of the interesting parts that I noticed looking at the version that we'll post with the podcast is the first step is establishing a baseline. What did we intend? And in our paper that you referenced, we've got the intent structure of the corporation, trying to identify that specifically. It's decision making followed by action, but you've got to have an intent to drive it. Why do we have to ask what was our intent? Is that because maybe we didn't know, or it was incompletely communicated? Why do we ask that first?
I think we ask that first because all action ostensibly should be geared towards that intent, that objective. And if that's not stated, and if that's left to guess, you're not going to be effective as an organization. If you don't have a defined intent, like no kidding, this is exactly what we're trying to accomplish, and all your efforts and all your actions should be dedicated towards manifesting this, towards achieving this. If everybody doesn't know that and everybody's not aware of that, you're not going to get anywhere. So it's very important to say at the beginning, what is it that we're intending to do? Remember from the last discussion and from our paper that intent plays a huge role, because ultimately that's what we're trying to get towards. And all of our learning, all of our actions, all of our interactions with teammates, all of our interactions with partners, everything that we're trying to do is ostensibly to advance us to that intent. Everybody has to know that. If everybody doesn't know that and everybody's not signed on to that, it's going to create ineffectiveness. It's going to create inefficiencies that competitors could very readily exploit if they're able to identify those things. So intent is huge, and those are ultimately our goals of what it is that we're actually trying to make happen. It's why people engage us in the first place. We're trying to manifest some end state in the future together as, business to clients or business and partners, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the other thing about intent that I've learned from CAS, from complex adaptive systems, is a positive. It's a focusing device. So if you don't have a clear intent, there's an infinite choice of things you could do, the actions you could take. Intent focuses that, constrains is the word they use in CAS. But that means you've got a choice of actions, which is not unlimited, and you can choose the best ones from the ones that fit the intent. So it's a good focusing device as well.
Yeah, yes, and it's also a freeing device, because when the intent is clearly understood by everyone is free, assuming that they're not breaking any laws or doing anything to harm anyone, as long as they're acting in order to achieve that intent. You actually have a pretty free range to go in addition with those, that constraint of mission. It's kind of a balance between a constraint and a focus, but the freedom to achieve that. I think we said in the last podcast how I would be told, hey, Captain McGrath, this has to happen. All right. I didn't have to be told how, and I would pass the order and tell the Marines the same thing. I never had to, because they knew, and my commanders that would tell me things, they would know, hey, as long as you're not breaking any laws or doing anything you're not supposed to do, you have the freedom to do it. And if you can find better ways to do it and faster ways to do that, that was never punished. That was always encouraged, eliminating steps and maybe doing something sort of unconventional, if you will.
So the next step in the AAR, which I've always loved, it's a very arresting concept, which is what happened. And sometimes we don't know what happened, or different people have different interpretations of what happened, or different people view it from different places, the front line versus, as you say, the top of the pyramid. So it's pretty hard to establish what happened, right?
It can be. And this is probably one of the most critical reasons why you need as many perspectives involved as possible, because there might not be uniformity in that answer to the question, what happened, or if something happened or didn't happen, what was the why behind it? Senior management might have one opinion, but the people down on the front lines might have a completely different opinion. And those perspectives need to be heard and valued, because it actually, there's the term, effective leaders don't create followers, they create leaders. It allows anybody at any level to take the initiative to share ideas and thoughts and put their own perspectives into the mission of the organization. And if that really has to be understood, and the more vantage points that you get, you're probably going to get a better definition of what did or didn't happen. And more importantly, why didn't it happen the way we wanted it to? And why is there a divergent viewpoint from, say, home office and out in the field? But you're never going to find that in a room locked with a whiteboard. You're going to have the free flow of information top to bottom in an effective learning culture.
Yeah, and this is a place where culture comes in, I think, Mark, because you told us last time that when you're trying to figure out what happened, there can't be any organizational hierarchy in the room. If there's a VP of sales there and it's the local salesperson who's reporting back on why we didn't get the contract, and we're trying to figure out exactly what happened so we can figure out why, you can't be deferential to the VP of sales if you want to say something critical about the sales strategy.
I think that the Japanese have a wonderful term. I think it's called Genshi Genbetsu, like go and see for yourself. And that's a part of this. I think that really ultimately suggests empathy, that leaders have to empathize and they have to put themselves in the shoes of someone else to gain a better understanding of their perspective and gain an understanding and a respect for what they're seeing, and also to validate it. Again, if it's effective and it advances the mission and we quash it and we don't hear the feedback, or someone doesn't have the environment's created where, someone would be retaliated against for bringing up a point. That's how cultures collapse. Ultimately, that's how they implode. And that's where, decision makers up at the top, they become single points of failure because they're the ones that are perceiving themselves as all knowing and all doing, and they're not relying on all the extra brain power that they have, all the extra eyes that they have, all the experience from vantage points that they can't see. I know that you and I both recently saw Top Gun, and I had a LinkedIn post about this a while ago. When an aircraft is being recovered on an aircraft carrier, we can assume that the pilot flying, they're probably very good pilots, because landing a plane on an aircraft carrier is one of the hardest things in aviation. But even still, no matter how good they are, there's 4, 5, 6 pilots on the back of the stern of the carrier called landing signal officers that are offering different vantage points to assist the pilot in making the right decisions to come down and land safely and effectively. And it's, primarily to get them on board safely, but it's also primarily to teach them continuously and make them aware of things that they could have done to have a better landing. And they're all graded. And my father-in-law, who is a naval aviator, would tell me the story that, an LSO might be a landing signal officer might be a junior officer, and the pilot landing might be the commander of the carrier air group. That young lieutenant has to go and tell the captain his grade. But in the culture, by and large, and I was not an aviator, but I know a lot of them, so I hear both sides. But by and large, that feedback from a junior subordinate needs to be honored and understood, because all it's there for is to help the senior officer become a better pilot, to be a safer pilot, to have more effective landings. And I always thought that the Marine Corps and the naval forces were really good at that, and not in every category, but in most categories, especially when it came down to dangerous activities like landing aircraft or using live ammunition, those sorts of things. There was no, I'm at the top and I know everything and you don't know anything. It was none of that. It was a very up and down free flow of information, done with, professionalism and mutual respect, but it makes the entire organization better.
Yeah.
And the best leaders, the best commanders, I think that was one of their characteristics. The best commanders I ever had, I was able to pick up the phone or go into their office and tell them exactly what was going on. And I didn't have to worry about getting my clock cleaned, as so long as I was bringing up something that was pertinent and valid to the mission. And that, that's, like I said, the Marine Corps is very adept at that. And we learned that from day one. Learning from each other was a characteristic of the organization, all the way through it. Even to this day, I still am mentored by former commanders, and I still provide mentorship to Marines that I was in command of, and I still learn from them, just like I did back then. And we all learn from each other. It continues going, but that's a cultural characteristic.
A quick note. Economics for Business is a uniquely Austrian platform to help entrepreneurs build value-generating businesses at every stage of the entrepreneurial journey. We've now launched online with an outstanding database of entrepreneurial knowledge, tools to solve specific business problems, and a community exchange to share information and experiences. Check it out at econ4business.com. That's ECON, 4, business.com. Explore and let us know what works best for you in the feedback section. Now, back to our conversation.
So here's a question about using the tool, Mark. When do you get to the point where you spend enough time on what happened? I'm thinking about that sales scenario again. We didn't get the contract. We can see who else it was ordered to. We don't know what the procurement committee was thinking. We can review our own presentation, our own product features and benefits and things like that. But at some point in time, we're going to get to the point where we don't know what happened, or we're going to know everything that has happened. We've got to move on. When do you make that decision?
Well, you always want to make sure that you're not beating a dead horse, right?
That's a better way of saying it, yeah.
Yeah. You always want to make sure that you're not beating a dead horse. You also want to make sure that you're not being repetitive for repetitive's sake. I would say that we're pursuing knowledge, but really ultimately what we're pursuing is understanding. And if we don't understand what happened, then we still have a ways to go. We know what happened. We can know something did or didn't happen, but until we understand why, then we're not ready to move. We're not ready to move forward. One of the things I had made a note about too was, what was I going to say? I forgot, but really I think it just comes down to that understanding. That's okay. I remember what it was. When you understand why something did or didn't happen, if it didn't happen, maybe it can't happen. Maybe it's beyond our capacity. And again, we have to have that environment and culture where we can be honest with ourselves to say it's beyond our capacity. If something is within our capacity, well, then we're going to keep working on it and keep trying to get better. I think that's another thing that might come out of an AAR. Something's just not in our realm. Something's just beyond our doing, and that's okay. Then we can divert action to things that we are able to do in order to achieve our mission and vision.
Yeah, that's a great point. It takes us back to, you mentioned Cabrera Research Labs and VMCL, which is Vision, Mission, Capacity, and Learning. So if there's a gap in capacity, we've got to figure out how to fill that. It's a great point. So then you're at the point where you've got an intent, you figured out what happened, you've got a gap. And so then how do you do the improvement part? I've got to get from this underperformance to do better next time. How do you do that?
So if we're suffering a setback, this kind of goes back to really what we were just talking to. I mean, if we get to that, we've identified that gap. That's where we have to really determine, did we miss this target in honest failure? Or is it not within our, was it not within our capacity? If it wasn't our capacity, then we have to keep hitting the drawing board, so to speak, or hitting the whiteboard to understand how we hit it the next time, because we are capable of doing this. And then that just goes to the sense that within that gap, if we keep missing something and we're not able to do it and it's out of our realm, I think that just comes down to an honest self-reflection. We can't do this. Mm-hmm. We have to have the courage, and we have to have the leadership climate that allows that sort of painful information or bad news, allows it to be brought out into the light. Because if we continue to act as if we're able to do something that we're in fact not, we're gonna have a lot more problems, and we're gonna become vulnerable to threats in the market forces.
Yeah, so we could say next time we won't try this because it can't happen. We can't do it.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about after actions, if they're done right, you might find a lot of things that you don't need to be doing. And the cool thing about that is you end up saving a lot more time.
Right. Not wasting time.
Not wasting time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of times we do things just to do things, or we do things because other companies are doing this, and they're disconnected from any type of intent that aligns with our mission and our capacity. And if it's not helping us manifest that, then we've got to stop, and we'll probably free up a lot of time.
Yeah. Now I noticed in one of the tools that you sent me, this is not just an AAR, after action review. It's a before action review, a during action review, and an after action review. You can do all three of those periods of time. In fact,
Yes.
in Austrian economics, we call it intertemporal. You're always trying to juggle the past, present, and the future. And every one of the steps can be taken for every one of those time periods. So take us through that. We're always doing all three things, before, during, and after action reviews?
The answer, I would say, is yes. And it goes back to the concept that learning is a continuous, ongoing process that never stops. In the example that we're discussing from this paper with that graphic, that's one of the things you're immediately drawn to is the intertemporal nature of it. And when we start to look at the various classifications in each time period, again, reviewing intent, ensuring that intent is understood by all, what's supposed to happen. And then all through the before, during, and after, how do we do relative to that ultimate intent? I love the term, when he talks in there about next time. I mean, we're future oriented. All action is it's Austrian term, right? Everything is future oriented. So we're constantly asking the question, hey, what's going to make us successful now in the present, but what's going to make us more successful in the future going forward? What are the things that we need to learn? What are the things that we need to stop doing? What are the things that we need to do more of? What are the things that we need to do less of? And ultimately, how are we going to be able to sustain that? And how are we going to be able to refine that? The term they use is pre-mortem, post-mortem, and then kind of the during. The other thing that we should this is really important to point out is really there's two types of after action reviews. There's formal and informal, and informal should be going on all the time. That's another way to say teaching, coaching. Informal is going on all the time. Formal after action reviews are something totally different. And again, their form will vary depending on the type of organization and the type of business and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think that you should have both, not one or the other.
Yeah. I was going to ask you how many of these you can be running at any point in time. But what you're saying is informally, you're always doing it.
Always doing it. Yeah. And you're always asking, you're always double checking. You're always saying, is there a way to do this better? Again, if you're doing it right, if you have the humility to accept that you don't know everything, you're always seeking improvement. And that's an informal process that really doesn't stop. You're constantly making adjustments.
Well, let's use that prompt to get to the learning culture, Mark. I diverted you from that part, but we'll come back to it now. You also shared with me, and I'll link to it, the MCDP7, which is one of the Marine Corps publications. It's in the public domain, so we can share it. And as you told me, if you cross out the word war and put in the word business, which I've actually done, I went through Microsoft Word Find and Replace, and you can actually do that, and it becomes a beautiful document about learning and business. So the Marines think about learning as a culture. They actually talk about developing the culture of learning. But why don't you talk to us about it? How do we develop the culture of learning?
So the Marines take this extremely seriously. And I know I used the word adept earlier, but the Marine Corps is extremely adept at at learning. It's one of the best kept secrets, where everybody knows about high and tight haircuts and marksmanship and the things that Marines are widely known for. But what a lot of people don't know is that the Marine Corps is arguably the most intellectual branch. You're constantly reading and learning from day one. I think we talked about on the last podcast how I even came into contact with John Boyd and his theories is from my amphibious warfare class, the Naval ROTC program, where we had a stack of books that we had to read and we had to discuss and we had to learn about battles. And ultimately what we're looking for is the more information and history and learning that I can upload into my own orientation, the more patterns I'll be able to recognize when I'm confronted with those situations. If you just take the introduction of that book, MCDP7, which to your point, all of these publications are available online. And one of my missions has always been to show everyone that, hey, your tax dollars paid for this. It's available online. You can print any one of these out. You can cross out war, as you say. You can put in business, hockey, baseball, lawyer. It doesn't matter. It's universally applicable. But a lot of the things that we would say in the Marine Corps, like say learning, for example, it's happening all the time, but they didn't put this publication out to 2020. And it's kind of like OODA, people say, well, we're already doing this. And I say, yes, I know. And the more that you understand the process and the more that you understand the characteristics, the better you can get at it. I think that's what the Marine Corps has done here is that they put out the characteristics of an effective learning organization, of an effective learning culture, the expectations of each Marine as a learner, and the expectation of every leader as a learning leader. And now you can get even better at it because it's been the concepts have been defined, and the concepts are being taught. Every Marine every year, depending on their rank, had a series of books that they were required to be able to read and be able to discuss. And there would be formal and informal discussion groups. There would be books that every Marine would have to read, like MCDP7 is a great example of a book that all Marines have to read. And then there would be books that captains would have to read, or sergeants would have to read, and colonels would have to read. And the idea being that you would come together with your peer groups and discuss it in order to become better at whatever it is that you're doing. But it's a massive part of the culture where we're always trying to improve. We're always trying to get better. The one of the LinkedIn posts that I put up 2 weeks ago, I put it says again, you can replace Marine Corps and place the term maneuver warfare, but it says the Marine Corps learning philosophy seeks to create a culture of continuous learning and professional competence that yields adaptive leaders capable of successfully conducting maneuver warfare, where you would replace that with business or entrepreneurship, in complex, uncertain, and chaotic environments. I mean, that's everything that we've talked about, that we've discussed in our paper. That's if you're not doing that as an organization, you're not going to be around. It's just you're not going to be able to adapt. If you're not learning, you're not growing. You're not developing. You're not going to be able to align your orientation with your market. You're not going to be able to align your orientation with the orientations of your clients, of your strategic partners. So learning has to be a cornerstone of any effective team and every member of that team.
Yeah. And in your own post, Mark, you've linked that culture of learning specifically to business with linking it to a growth mindset. So thinking business growth, what's learning as a growth mindset, or a winning mindset, if you want to use that competitive kind of phraseology. So it's a direct translation, right? The culture of learning becomes your ability to grow the firm.
Correct. Yeah. The mindset is part of the internal makeup of one's orientation. Again, both individually and as a team. And how you think about things are going to have an effect on what becomes or what doesn't become. How you look at it is all going to depend on your frame of mind. Now, if you go through some of those comments, there were more than a few people that were negative on that, suggesting that maybe you should only focus on strengths and not weaknesses, or somebody put up there, and I still don't really understand it, but quote unquote, we've moved beyond mindset. But I can't think of anything I do where mindset's not involved, either a positive mindset or a negative mindset. I think you also saw on LinkedIn today, I'm involved in a 32-mile virtual swim, and I swam 4.427 miles this morning, starting at 5:30. Well, you're not going to be able to convince me that we've moved beyond mindset, because mindset is exactly what got me up at 4:15. Mindset's what got me up to make sure I had enough water. Mindset was made sure I was on time. Mindset was, I wasn't complaining about the 60-degree temperature. Mindset was getting in the water and swimming until I was done. So I don't see how I don't see where mindset wouldn't fit. But what the Marines are talking about specifically is a growth mindset, and they specifically cite Carol Dweck, which apparently from some of the comments, she has a lot of detractors. But if we're not growing, if we're not the growth mindset to me means that we're constantly challenging our assumptions in order to get better, in order to improve, and we're choosing things to do that are possibly hard or possibly more difficult than sort of the easy way out, where we wouldn't grow. We're seeking opportunities to grow, but that's all going to come from our orientation framed that way. Seeking growth.
There's one thing you mentioned I just want to probe a little deeper. You talk about, and it talks about in MCDP 7, the learning leaders. It also talks about self-directed learning. I recoil every time I hear the word leader, but I understand how that works in the armed forces. You got to have it. But can't we just be learners on our own and collaboratively with other people? Do we need learning leaders? What's the idea behind that?
I think the learning leader goes back to that quote that I used earlier. Good leaders don't have followers; they create leaders. Good leaders don't create followers; they create leaders. And functionally in the Marine Corps, yes, there's leaders. At every level, and I would offer that within the Marine Corps, the emphasis is on leadership, the quality of leadership that's attainable by every Marine, that's supposed to be displayed by every Marine. And I think that that's really the ultimate goal, is to develop that self-leadership. You're not going to be able to, I think it was Douglas MacArthur says, you can't seek to master others if you haven't mastered yourself. Well, if you're not a learner, you're not going to make somebody a learner. If you're not setting the example of learning. And I think that one of the that specific post that I had put up from that chapter on learning leaders, the specific trait was actually humility, was what gets us on the path to mastery. Mm-hmm. That humility was a non-negotiable for not only effective leaders, but for effective leadership, the quality, which again, if you're promoting the right kind of culture, if you're building the right kind of culture, everybody at every level is a leader to some extent, and they have to understand that what it means, leadership, the quality, and how they carry themselves, and in this case, how they learn. The two examples that they gave in the book are General Alfred M. Gray, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps in the 80s, and he was a very early collaborator and adopter of maneuver warfare, and had collaborated with Boyd. And then General James Mattis, who he was the Secretary of Defense in the last administration, who's a retired Marine general, who's actually mentioned in the book Warfighting, his unit is anyway. And I think in both cases, these were very humble leaders that created environments where learning was characteristic, and learning from each other, more importantly, irrespective of your rank, irrespective of your station within the Marine Corps. Learning was everybody's job, and it flowed up and down, from top to bottom and from bottom up, and it made everybody better on the team. And that's ultimately, I think, what they're saying is essentially leaders have to set the tone They have to create the culture, the characteristics I use of an effective. Go back to AfterAction reviews. You have to leave rank and emotion out. There can be nothing ad hominem. There could be no retribution for somebody that brings up a true, pertinent point. And if we're doing that and we're nurturing that, then we're going to get better as a team.
Yep, which is what we're aiming for, betterment, as Mises calls it. So, Mark, I think you've added a huge additional component to the adaptive entrepreneurial model. We'll post that graphic again so that you can see that the decision and action component links back to the observation orientation through feedback loops. And the after-action review occurs in those feedback loops. Although, as you say, it's occurring all the time because you're before, during, and after as your review. But specifically, it helps you translate the feedback loops, gets you to update your observations, reorient, as you always advise us to do, and advance through the loop again. So I think it's a big reinforcement to the model.
And back to our paper and some of the comments that someone put on my last post about John Boyd and its shapes. So remember, when we talk about orientation shapes. That's all. It shapes our observations. It shapes our decisions. Or it shapes our actions. And what we're talking about today, it shapes our learning. That's the loop. That's the important thing to remember. That our orientation, our internal operating system, our mindset, our emotional state, our capacity for learning, our understanding, all of that is going to have a direct effect on those things: observations, decisions, actions, and learning. And then when we understand that, then we can continue to get better at that.
So our next paper, I think, should be on orientation, so that we can be more definitive about describing that for entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial orientation. So that's the next thing we'll work on.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Good. Well, Mark, thank you very much for today. You've advanced our thinking and our knowledge a lot. We'll make links to a number of those references that you cited, and we'll continue to try to help entrepreneurs by developing this kind of thinking and working. So thank you.
Thanks, Hunter. It's always a pleasure.
Economics for Business is a production of the Mises Institute. To explore more content like this, visit econ4business.com. And for more from Hunter Hastings, visit hunterhastings.com.